Alright, hello everyone. We're going to get started. Steve is going to be here, but he got stuck on the Beltline, so he's going to be like 5 to 10 minutes late, I think. We will just get started with a couple slides to start with. I had some introduction, there's some background slides that we have talked about some of this at a previous, I think it was steering committee number 2, but we wanted to bring it up at the beginning again. First, and then Steve will have some additional slides, and if we still have some more time before he gets here, we've got a few other slides that we can talk through. Aaron had sent an idea of showing some of the densities of existing Fitchburg neighborhoods, and Deanna puts together some slides with some images and information on that, so we could go through that too if we have some additional time before Steve gets here. So I will just give me a minute here. I'll share my screen and then we can get moving.
Are we on FACTv right now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Right.
Okay, good.
Okay, so kicking off again with some background, the future urban development growth boundary process started in the early 2000s and leading up to the 2009 comp plan. There was a process established to develop the future urban growth boundaries. Scott, are you able to move the participant list up to the corner or something? So anyway, there were several criteria that were set up in establishing the future urban development areas. Those are listed here, but they were protecting natural areas and farmland, controlling the rate of urban growth, sustainable long-term provision of city services, including sewer, water, police, fire. And during this process, they looked at, and I think I mentioned this, but this was a multi-year, heavily engagement-focused process, but they looked at several models of urban growth, concentric, which kind of means sticking near the urban boundary and kind of being very close to that, corridor, which was kind of growing exclusively along Highway 14 and the Fitchburg Oregon rail line, and then the FUTA model that they developed was a blending of those two options. Our comprehensive plan, and this is city policy, specifies a maximum of 75 acres per year of urban service area expansion, and we have been staying under that. Some of these other policies require the protection of environmental corridors within these development areas and encourage compact development to reduce agricultural land conversion. So that resulted in, oops. Where's my mouse? There it is. So through that process, the FUTAs that you see here were established. Greenfield being one of them, and kind of next in line after McGaw. And during the FUTA process, we had there were some primary goals of that. Coexistence of urban and rural communities, attractive transit-oriented neighborhoods, and protecting natural resources and farmland. And again, some of the priorities that were balanced here was the rail corridor focus, protecting high-quality agricultural lands, maintaining groundwater recharge areas, encouraging redevelopment and infill development within already developed areas, and then limiting growth to areas that can be sewered by a grant fee sewer service. And these then require a neighborhood plan. These FUTAs require a neighborhood plan before urban services can be expanded into those areas. I think that was a couple of the things we wanted to highlight there. Let me stop sharing.
I think a couple things to know is by state statute, every 10 years you're supposed to update the comprehensive plan. It was 2019 that we looked at it again, so we were actually over state statute. At that point, we really just made a couple tweaks because there hadn't been enough changes, we thought at that point in time, to do a full-blown redo of this in the comprehensive plan. I know that the plan, at least last I heard, was after this process is done, in about a year, maybe 2 years, to do a full-blown look at the comprehensive plan again, at which point in time, maybe they use the same criteria, maybe there's some changes, hard to say. That was the criteria used 15 years ago, and so that is something that the whole comprehensive plan piece is going to be coming up after this and the South Stoner Prairie neighborhood plans are done.
Yeah, thank you for that. And at the time that these were created, the council and plan commission at that time determined that this model that ended up with these growth areas was kind of the best balance of all of those priorities. I think we wanted to highlight again that this process is important, this neighborhood planning process is important, so that if a landowner elects to sell or develop their land, that we're proactive in determining what use is there. We're not kind of waiting for a development proposal and then responding to it. We have this kind of robust process that results in a plan that guides development and minimizes potential conflicts with surrounding properties and kind of establishes an orderly growth. I think bringing it to Greenfield, with those priorities that were in there, the Fitchburg, Oregon rail corridor focus, protecting the high quality agricultural lands, and I'm highlighting this because I think, Ed, you shared a lot of this background at the last public meeting, and I think that was really helpful. Groundwater recharge areas, that's why, I think you can see in those priorities where Greenfield kind of falls into that. So anyway, just wanted to give that some background. And Steve, do you need us to, Deanna put together those density slides, we could share those if you need some.
That would be amazing.
Okay, sounds good. So I will share those again. And Deanna, do you want to talk through those or do you want, okay.
So thank you, Erin, for this suggestion. We just put together a few slides to look at what does actual housing density look like in the city of Fitchburg based on some neighborhoods that have already been developed. So sometimes it's kind of hard to get our heads around what it means when we say low density or medium high density. It can be difficult to show what that really does mean. So put together a couple quick slides and we can just hop into many of you will be familiar with some of these neighborhoods already, and that one didn't get corrected, but this one is actually Quarry Hill, and it should be low density, but that was my error. But this gives you an idea of what a low density neighborhood looks like in terms of how the houses are sit on the lots and kind of the relationship in lot size.
And this is just right up here.
It is, yep. Yeah, just south of Lacey, right here. One of our older neighborhoods. Not really old, but compared to the newer stuff, I should say. Another low density neighborhood here. You can kind of get the sense of how the houses sit in relationship to the street, the sidewalk, in the lot sizes.
And this is right up Lacey Road at the roundabout at Fahey if you go south.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This one is another low density one, Fahey Fields, a little bit farther to the south of Waterford Glen. Now I've put in a couple of the medium density neighborhoods. These are condos that are right off of Fish Hatchery in Oak Meadow. So now this is medium density, 5 to 9 units per acre, and you can see that the buildings are not much larger in size, but townhouse forms, the buildings are closer to one another. So this is what kind of condos medium density looks like. But you get still, if I go
Sorry,
back.
yep, sorry.
I can just talk.
Sure.
But you kind of get a sense, the relationship to the street in terms of low density doesn't look a whole lot different, right? It's still 2 stories, you still see the sidewalk. It looks a little different from the air, looking down in plan view, but from the street, it's not a whole lot different in my eyes from low density. Here's Pine Ridge. This is just to the north of McKee, another single-family development. The street is a little bit narrow. These don't have the sidewalks that we generally see, but gives you an idea of what a medium-density residential single-family looks like. And now I have a couple of our newer neighborhoods. So this is Terra Vesta. This is done under Smart Code, and this is what would be considered the medium-high density. So 5 to 9 dwelling units per acre. The houses are not necessarily a whole lot smaller than what you saw in the previous slides, but you can see the houses are smaller. The lots are smaller. There's less setback between the houses. The lots are served by alleys. We'll see that too. We're proposing some of that for Greenfield, how the lots, the garages are off the rear of the lot, off of alleys. And that leaves a really nice, more urban kind of feel for the street front. So you still see the sidewalks, the similar kinds of setbacks, but this is getting to more of the medium-high density residential. And then also just off of Syene is Uptown Crossing, another real similar Smart Code development, served with garages off alleys, and you can kind of get a sense of what it's like from the air. This is not Fitchburg, but I just wanted to throw this in. This is the Near East Side of Madison. Similar kind of densities of what you were looking at, right? Much older neighborhood, similar kinds of setbacks than what we just saw in Terra Vesta and Uptown Crossing. Similar distances in between the houses, but kind of gives you an idea of how a neighborhood can evolve over time and serve that housing need. So I'm open to take any questions to see if that kind of helps to make sense.
Can you explain what Smart Code is?
You bet. Yep. So the city kind of has 2 different zoning codes, I could say. One is our traditional zoning, which is low density, medium density, high density, commercial, industrial. Our standard, and then we also have our Smart Code zoning, which will include all of Terra Vesta and 9 Springs, and that allows for some of those smaller lots and mixed use. It's designed to be more of an urban kind of zoning code.
And how do you determine what is developed under Smart Code and what is not?
Sure, just like in any other kind of process, when the developer comes and they tell us we would like to develop a project, we'll work with them to determine whether Smart Code makes a good fit for their project or whether or not a more standard zoning.
And what criteria do you use to make that decision?
If the developer we like Smart Code, but it would be the choice of the developer
Okay.
to go into Smart Code.
Second question is, you just showed us examples with single-family housing, but you didn't show any examples with multifamily housing in terms of, obviously probably not low, but medium to high. Can you pull up some examples of that?
Yeah, we probably could.
Because it's not clear to me under these proposed plans what, if it just says low density, medium, high, whether that's single family or
I think
multifamily?
mostly what we have been showing is mostly the medium to low density to maybe some medium high is mostly what we have been showing.
Single family or?
I say owner occupied. Could be condos, townhomes that aren't, I guess, single family, but not standalone, not necessarily standalone.
Mhm.
Would you
Yeah.
say, Deanna, that would it be pretty difficult to have rentals in a medium density unless you do pretty small?
It's not impossible. We certainly, in Smart Code, a good example would be, like when you just go into Terabessa, Lacey, on Lacey Road, there's a couple mixed use buildings that have, commercial on the bottom and then about 11 rental units on the top. So something like that kind of scale could be medium. We don't see just what the financing structure and the development trends right now. We don't see much of that 5 to 10 to 11 to even 20 unit buildings, right? That's not where the financing structure sits right now. So mostly when we see new development, Avante does some of the 60, 50, and 60 unit buildings, but otherwise most of the stuff that we're getting is plus 100, pushing 160, 170 units.
And one last thing, I think the other thing that, and maybe you can speak to the financing piece, since you talked about financing, is that neighborhoods like what is in Greenfield right now, Tower Hill, where got these half acre, thin acre lots, just isn't feasible anymore with the prices of land. And I think you probably see that a lot at the bank. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but that's not feasible.
You might build that in Belleville or somewhere, but
Yeah.
we get that close to Madison, the land is too expensive to have lots that size. Smart Code, you're talking about, there is a minimum acreage also, and I don't recall where we ended up on that, it was changed at one point. There's a minimum acreage to use Smart Code. And I don't remember whether it was 40 acres or.
I would just guess, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be a good sized
Yeah.
piece, or else it doesn't really make sense, and you use PUD instead.
Right, there is, yes,
Yeah.
you're right.
What
I
is
don't know off the top of my head. There's a way to do some infill development under Smart Code, but yes, generally, it's going to be a bigger development. But like when Highfield Reserve came, we did that under our more traditional zoning, we did that with PDD. Even though it's a smaller lots, right? They're not big lots.
I don't have the exact number, I'm putting it up on the screen, I live in Sun Prairie, so I know about this development. If you've been there, we're Buck and Honey's up Bird Street. On the east side there, it was supposed to be office at one point, and then ultimately, what you see of those buildings on the north end are, I believe, 12-unit buildings, they are rental. But it's about having, usually it's not just a single building, they do it as a complex like this. And so you see ultimately 36 units that fit adjacent to duplex lots. Then you see the single family neighborhood to the east of that. Now to the south, it's all part of the same development, is a 34 unit with some commercial component here. So the blending of this development together made that work. So there is a larger building with some commercial, but then further to the north is those smaller buildings that fit more into the character of the neighborhood. If I can, should be looking at my own screen. I can just give you an example of what that looks like. If it is there, and it's not. I thought there was, so that was what it sounded like for years. Let's see if I go to this corner. I guess it won't, I thought it did. Oop, no, sorry,
Still going
nope.
Foundations were in, but.
Yeah,
Deanna, you and I talked, and I asked you, because a lot of people are familiar with the Addison. I watched its growth go from 3 buildings to 6 buildings. That is now high density, correct?
It is.
So
It would
people want to
cons-
see what, more of a square building on a lot and how many you could get on there without having to build an elevator. That's a good example of that.
Mhm.
My follow-up question is on some of these things, particularly with Smart Code and whatever, and packing these things as closely as possible, is, where do children play? I you have to have a green space that's within, or should have green space within a few blocks. But that's not always happening with these developments, and that's a concern of mine. That, you know, in the old style of a house that all of us grew up in, more or less, going to make some assumptions here. You know, there was at least a backyard to play in where there wasn't exposure to the street, and you could play with your friends and play ball, whatever you needed to do. And your parents could watch you outside the window, and it just felt like a very safe environment. I just feel like, you know, we need to build that in if you're gonna do anything with these higher densities. There needs to be a safe place that the kids can get to without necessarily always being accompanied by an adult.
I completely agree. We do work with each one of the new developments to identify those. And of course, we do have park impact fees that require a certain amount of green space or funds to do that. So, yep, we work on it.
And I would say that can go into this plan about not only just specifically, normally we want to pick out if there's going to be an area that we want to preserve because of the character that's there, existing natural resources, or the size that we would think needs a park based on what we're showing for the rest of it. But ultimately, it's in the policies and the vision and description that's going to play into that at a local level once you start doing individual developments, that the interest of the neighborhood based on the policies suggests that there should be a neighborhood park within X distance. And so I think we can incorporate that into some of this. Is there more on this before we jump in?
Hi, this is Peter. Yeah, sorry, this is Peter Alperman. I'm on the Zoom representing the Stonemans. I'm going to try to be in and out here, but I know Mary Sue sent a note saying we weren't really able to make tonight work. But I just want to make a couple quick comments on a few things that were said. One, the mention of that, you know, half acre to full acre lots just aren't feasible. That's a choice that Fitchburg is making. You know, I know there are areas in Middleton where there is a there's areas in Cross Plains, there's areas in Verona where they say, no, you actually have to have a minimum lot size requirement. So I don't think we should just dismiss that out of hand. If we're going to tell landowners what they can and can't do with their land 50 years from now, let's, you know, do it in a way that is something we actually want to live with, not just allow the city to dictate, you know, certain densities of residential or whatever. The second point is to that point again on the parks that we were just talking about. You know, I think the original comment, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'll say what I heard. What I heard was it's nice for people to have their own backyards, and the response was, how about we have the city government own some land that people can play on in a park? And I don't think that's what at least that's not what I would like to see. I would like to see large lots that match the character of the Greenfield Park neighborhood, half acre to 1 acre, and have them be available for people to own themselves and take care of themselves, not be reliant on the city to do that. So I think in general, I'm hearing a lot of sort of assumptions from the city on what we should do or what we can do. And here, you know, 2009 said we should be by the train tracks. And like, that doesn't make any sense because why would you have to go by the train tracks? We're never putting passenger rail in there or something like that. So like, I really think the committee should think about not only, you know, what do we want, but also to not just accept the assumptions that are being told to us directly without really thinking about, do we actually have to do this, or are people just assuming we do? Because I think we have a capability to make our voices heard on this in a way that doesn't just accept what we're being told. Thanks.
And we can get into a little bit more about, you know, what went all into the concepts, not just about property interests, but also the bigger picture about taxpayer base and infrastructure costs, and we'll get into that. But I think I wanted to pull back from the fact of where we're going with this over time is maybe we should take a step back and say, it was in the memo, what are the vision and overall goals we want to see if development does happen, and likely at some point it will take place where some lands are sold and developed over time. Not saying when that is, if that's 10, 20 years from now, but part of our process is to consider how we can balance the growth needs and desires of property owners at some point to what this neighborhood should be policy-wise. So I put in there kind of 4 main topics, and one is housing. I broke this out into 2 parts because CARPC was unable to attend tonight, but they provided comments. So part 1, they had no comment, which is additional housing options will be provided in the neighborhood, but will be strategically placed, designed, and buffered to be compatible with the existing Greenfield residents. Is there concerns with that statement in any way?
This is Peter again, just jumping in, and I would say that is, I think, the overarching thing that we're asking for here. And that compatible, defining that compatible to be consistent with what the Greenfield Park neighborhood is, I think is a really important thing. Not just saying, oh, it's low density and we're gonna pack 6 houses per acre here, but that still falls under low density, so that counts. Other than that, I really like that statement. I just wanna make sure it's interpreted, in a way that we have a mutual understanding of it.
Yeah, so again, these are goals. I think once we kind of have some direction on these, it builds into policies related to that, and that gives more definition to what we're talking about in this goal. Any other comments or? Otherwise, the other part was a range of housing options close to jobs is not only important for the developed area of the region, but is also important to have safe, quality housing near farms for agricultural workers. The question that came from CARPC is there a need, concern for ag workers housing in this area? Be more explicit about anticipated job growth in the neighborhood and a corresponding growth in demand for housing. So I don't know if we specifically heard that there is a need for providing housing specific to agriculture or farming. If that is, let's keep something like that in there, or we can pull back on that statement.
I'm glad that CARPC brought that up because I too had questions when I saw that go out, and Brad did an excellent job with the memo. Thank you again, Brad. But not really at this time because we're so into monoculture that a lot of the farmers and whatnot, they live on the land and then they lease out equipment and so forth. I'm not an expert in agriculture here. But we don't have the types of crops yet where there's a lot of picking. We have migrant workers and so forth. What we do have is, I think, a deficit overall that I've heard about county-wise. I am concerned about people that are like, first responders, teachers, people in the medical field, that they're not always having to commute into Fitchburg. And I think we need to understand and appreciate that those people might want to live here in Fitchburg rather than having to do a commute every day.
I agree with Elizabeth, I think that's more likely than agricultural workers.
I agree with that.
No one's milking around here anymore.
But that doesn't consider one of the concepts that we all talked about as a committee early on, which were those agri-hoods. And that seems to have been completely erased from our conversations. So if you assume that we're gonna continue in a monoculture agricultural model, then I would agree, there doesn't seem to be a need for ag workers specifically. But if we look at potential changes in how we farm the land and who we use to farm the land, then maybe that is an important statement.
That's also true. I'm not trying to explicitly rule out agricultural workers at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say that we're not going away from the agri-hood. It's still in the concepts. And I wouldn't say that forum's always directed at providing housing for the ag workers. It's the idea that people live in the community based around farming, and a lot of times they have markets and other aspects to it. It's more about like a conservation subdivision related to farming. You could have housing specific to ag workers.
Right.
And I would guess it's not gonna be a very high number of ag workers on a property, like it's not gonna be 50 people, it might be 10. And so it's important to have housing for
Right.
those people, for the teachers, for responders. I think I don't see a need to call them out necessarily.
Right.
If we have that, great, and I think it's good to have some options for people that are doing that.
Right.
Just not.
So I'm just wondering if it's removing the specific statement on this last 5 words. The rest of it can remain.
Yeah.
Well, Yeah, my concern with your 4 categories is I don't see agriculture in there as a topic.
Okay, we can get there adding that, but is everyone comfortable with part 2 of this if we just eliminate that part? Maybe it should be options. Again, I'll use options twice, but main point is not to be so specific about ag workers.
Sure.
And I think it could be maybe under this category, it'd be a separate category, but under economic job growth, this is employment and goods services will be located and connected to reduce the dependency on longer vehicle travel and to provide vibrancy along edges of the neighborhood. This could be a 2-part one if we want to specifically say something about agriculture, or it could be a separate topic in general.
So I'm not sure why we're focusing on vibrancy along the edges of the neighborhood. That didn't make sense to me. You do want vibrancy in the neighborhood, but if you're also, looking at kind of standard planning, even comparing it to our smart growth, generally the density tapers off as you get further away from, the arterials, whether that's going to be, Highway 14 and the rail corridor. So I don't know that you necessarily are going to have vibrancy on that. I don't know how you define that on that western edge. I'm not sure what this
I don't
means.
know along the edges, but in the conceptions, it's pretty apparent, we'll be discussing this later tonight, at the intersection of Sayin and Irish.
Northeast quadrant, yeah, I mean, that was what I heard from most people, if there were gonna be any commercial or jobs, that it's in the northeast quadrant. So I guess edges is leaving to say all 4 edges, but it was, in my mind, drafting was related to the edge of the neighborhood in the northeast. But
It doesn't have to be absolutely there, but I tend to think of Sayin and Irish Lane as sort of like the crossroads of the Greenfield neighborhood, even though it's on the north side, and I do think what we talked about before was, and we'll get into this about what we each feel would be helpful to be there, but to have some retail there so that people can, meet each other, and even if it's something like a restaurant or a coffee shop or whatever, we can get to that later, that it's not just residential housing, but it has other things. Like we have K&A greenhouse on Fish Hatchery in Irish Lane. I mean, that used to be Winter Garden, and so that's a business that's there that people just take, it's just a fixture on the landscape, and so I think we just take that for granted. But we can get into that later. I do think that it's not just we've been up to kind of almost a solely residential type of neighborhood, and we'll be building in some retail and business, I think.
so, yeah.
Hi, this is Peter again. I actually disagree with that. The size of this neighborhood is, in the sort of the planned area, in my opinion, is small enough that I actually don't think there is that need. I think it should be a purely residential space. I don't see a reason to plan for businesses, plan for a business park, plan for anything like that. I think the relative vehicle travel to get to, Panera or Pick and Save or Hy-Vee in Oregon is minimal and basically what everyone does on a routine, regular basis. And so planning to further try to reduce that, I think, would serve only a handful of residents in the neighborhood and isn't a necessary or appropriate goal.
I will say, public response, while in general didn't love a lot of intensive development, there was a good group of people that felt that it wasn't close enough to some shops and retail, and felt that if there were any development, east of the tracks made sense. So I'm hearing you, Peter, I'm just noting that there's others that have spoken that had, from the neighborhood, had interest in that.
Is that from a survey or what?
Survey and even at the neighborhood meeting.
We haven't done surveys.
Okay, but I would just say, as the steering committee and as a member of the steering committee, I do not think the steering committee should have that as a goal. If the public overwhelmingly says, no, we need, more businesses in this, residential neighborhood, I can't do anything to prevent that other than to say, we as the city shouldn't be dictating to people who own land what they get to do with their land. But all that being said, my opinion is it's not important, and I would advocate that the steering committee remove that as a goal.
But the word vibrancy or the concept of retail and commercial development?
I don't think we have very many people who live in this neighborhood or are going to live in this neighborhood where employment specifically within the 1 mile radius of the neighborhood is an important thing. So I don't think driving towards employment within the neighborhood matters. And I think relatively speaking, the importance of, you know, goods and services within the neighborhood is pretty well served already. And if it happens to happen that, you know, somebody wants to put up a greenhouse or there's another quick trip on the other side of the neighborhood or something like that, like great, fine. I don't see it as a central goal for something we absolutely as a committee need to be striving for. If it happens incidentally through the course of natural sort of market forces dictating it, then great. But I don't think the city government should try to plan.
Any other thoughts of the committee on that?
I respect what Peter is saying. I understand, and, you know, I do have thoughts and comments on the concepts. But I think about, you know, how many people right now are going to the Pick and Save and going to the Woodman's, and if more development is in the area, how easy is it for me to go into and go to Pick and Save and go to Woodman's and still with some sort of ease, or is there just between Madison and Fitchburg and whatever, it's just gonna be so congested? And it not right now, but you know, 10, 20 years from now, I don't think that we'll know. I understand where Peter's coming from, particularly emotionally, the whole idea of, you know, businesses being part of the mix. And I think we should talk about that more when we get to it. But I just don't think that we should be, you know, ruling out business just yet. Because I think we all kind of, in Greenfield, we grew up with a certain type of mentality of we're just get in the car and then we're just going to drive to get our groceries, and we're going to drive into Madison for our entertainment, and we're going to do this, and it's all car oriented. And I think it's kind of a scary thing to think about, you know, the business retail sector coming to Greenfield on some level because we're not used to it. But I can't imagine just being so totally, you know, car dependent for future generations, 10, 20 years down the line. You know, that's just me, Peter.
Well, I think we're all kind of jumping to like this concept of another Pick and Save or something giant and Target or whatever. And I think we can think about commercial or businesses in multiple ways. For example, maybe the neighborhood develops a farmer's market, like a permanent type farmer's market that fits the flavor of the neighborhood and becomes a place that the neighborhood can use. Or, you know, and maybe it becomes an extension of a greenhouse thing. I mean, there are concepts that we're not talking about. I think we're jumping to like this idea of it's gonna be this big commercial thing. I also think we're disregarding the fact that, you know, we're moving to electric vehicles, and so the car as the enemy is not necessarily a preconceived concept that we should all be jumping on.
I haven't embraced that yet, but there is, when you power up your vehicle, right now, fossil fuel is being used to get the electricity into
Well,
the
we're
vehicle.
building lots of solar fields.
I know, but, and I've heard complaints about that too, that
I know.
we have all this development going on, but people are not being required on those new houses to put solar. So you're relying on farmers to put solar panels in their fields. And there are some people that are very, not happy with that. So, I mean, I think there's a good deal to discuss, and I certainly want to respect everybody's opinion. I just don't want to totally, I think this economy job growth thing is a big discussion, and, you know, we're just 5 people here, and it's something that maybe we should discuss more within Greenfield and get more feedback, or within Fitchburg and get more feedback, because I don't know that we're gonna decide everything tonight.
Yeah, so I think there's a question mark on this one, but I did revise it to say connected to reduce dependency on longer vehicle travel and to provide local and convenient options near the neighborhood. Again, policies can be more stringent on the sizing of that in close proximity, like you're noting that there could be smaller scale adjacent to the neighborhood. So we won't kill it, we'll revise it and bring it back for further discussion.
I think the strip mall, grocery store thing, Fitchburg had state-of-the-art far box on Fish Hatcher Road, that went to the dumps. Nothing's been revived of it. Cahill, Maine was state-of-the-art pick and save, that's going to the dumps, so now we're gonna move another one down here and do the same thing over again. I think that's wrong.
Well, just because we provide potential zoning for it doesn't mean somebody's gonna come along and build it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't think we should freak out yet.
No, but the other thing is
They're gonna build a grocery store.
The other thing is we want the community to be involved in this 8 o'clock email this morning for a meeting that's 9.5 hours later is BS. And the last meeting we were at, we talked about better informing the neighborhood about these meetings, and then we pull this crap. And I think that's unacceptable, and you people are sitting there taking your notes, but then when it comes time for the meeting, we're just, hey, Monday morning, we're having a meeting tonight. Did you find out about that today at 8 o'clock, Steve? Brad, did you find out about it at 8 o'clock this morning? Ed, did you find about it at 8 o'clock this morning?
No, this has been on the calendar for some time, and I think these things get pushed out too.
It's
don't
been
they?
posted for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
This email came out this morning at 8 o'clock. There was nothing posted before this morning.
I said, I apologize that my notify me didn't go out sooner. This is a steering committee meeting. It's not just tailored directly for the public. We welcome the public. The steering committee meeting has been posted for well over a week, if not longer.
Then why did we notify you that we want notified of all these meetings?
I apologize, that was my error, it just slipped by us.
I believe state law says 24 hours for any governmental meeting.
It was properly
It was
noticed.
Quality of life and social equity. Provide and maintain open space that provides recreation and tranquility that supports healthier and more equitable environments in and around the Greenfield neighborhood. Comment from CARPC was revision to maintain open spaces accessible to all residents for recreation and neighborhood character preservation. So if there's reactions to either one, modifications to it, open to thoughts on this. And again, this is where you might have policy specific to the parks and location that you were mentioning, Elizabeth.
Yeah, the maintenance thing I am a little bit concerned about, because the city has expenses with that. Sometimes they can get very tight-fisted. In particularly with regard to parks, in regards to developments, they are currently facing a challenge in maintaining those spaces, and that's come out over the past year at the council meetings and whatnot, that now after 20 years, and there's some sort of clause that makes the developer responsible for certain things for like 20 years. Now, so many of these park spaces have aging equipment and so forth, that the city is now going to have to put forth a great deal of money to replace equipment and such. So the spaces that we're trying to protect, I don't think require a lot of maintenance, but I mean, in general, I agree with the statement, but we have to understand that it will be, the city will have probably some opinion on maintaining stuff.
And there could be linear parks with just mostly about passive, like trail through open preserved lands. It doesn't always have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to have tons of maintenance, but still.
Mhm. Any other comments or interest in which statement?
I have a question about how this dovetails with the earlier sort of goals that Brad, you outlined in your first slide about protecting natural areas and farmland. pretty vague.
Yeah, we can beef it up if you have thoughts that you wanna see incorporated in it.
You think you'd like,
I prefer the proposed revision on this one. I think the proposed revision is preferable. I think when we use the words like healthier and more equitable, it introduces a level of complexity to decision making and who gets to decide what's healthier, who gets to decide what's more equitable, how do we assess that, how do we, drive that. I think the second one speaks a little more plainly, more directly to a goal, so that's my preference.
I agree with that.
I do too.
Healthier and more equitable implies that we're comparing this to something else that isn't healthy and equitable, and I'm not sure what we're comparing this to, so let's not do that.
I agree.
But is there interest to adding to that second one related to farmland or natural areas specifically?
Yeah, well, what is the definition of open spaces? I mean, can we change that to reflect more about preserving natural areas and farmland? I mean,
Yeah, you could say farmland and open spaces.
I was gonna say, I would think most here would tell me that farmland is not open space, that's actually an active use, so we probably wanna put an and on that,
okay,
right? Maintain available farmland and
so it's an open,
accessible open spaces to all.
is an open space
Separate.
something like, the woods behind the
Yes, and we
Cold
can put in
Drive
parentheses, for
neighborhood?
example, woodlands, wetlands, waterways,
Mhm. That's all
historic
included.
trees,
Okay,
Curry Court green space that's this high in weeds. It says, right on the sign, it says a Fitchburg green space, but it's almost shoulder high in weeds.
there's probably critters in there.
So I might wonder if it would be a secondary sentence then, so that it doesn't get caught up in this, if we wanna have something about, preserving some, quality farmland within the neighborhood.
I guess my concern with saying that you want to provide maintained farmland is how possible is that long term? There might be families that want to, which is great, and they're happy to do that. But how are we gonna just pick out properties that are gonna maintain that or not? I think that's a choice that a property owner has to make. And we can't sit here and say this property or that property. We know one or two that might want to, but I guess my concern with that is that at some point in time, how feasible is it going to be as this continues to grow and develop in this area? Because Fitchburg's gonna keep developing. It has for the 47 years I've been alive. It's gonna continue for a long time. At some point in time, it just might not be feasible that no one wants to farm that. And at what point in time is it too difficult to farm that? And so, yes, that's nice, and maybe for a short term that's possible, but is that a long-term possibility? Well, someone might at some point come in and offer someone $100 million for that land, and guess what, farming's over there, if that's their choice, and that's their choice. Now, someone might say $1 million and say, no, I'm keeping this farming. Someone comes in and says 10 million, they might say, all right, well, I'm gonna go buy some farmland in Greene County and farm there. So I guess that's my one concern when I hear people want to keep maintain farming. Very few people in Fitchburg make a living farming and farming only. Some people farm, but it's not what they're doing to create a living. And I think that that's unfortunately gonna continue.
But keeping farmland and keeping open space as a goal, as a guiding principle, doesn't necessarily dictate that they have to in any more than saying, we're changing the zoning to low density dictates that they have to do that. So I don't see why as a sort of policy guide.
Well, if you say it has to be low density, well, in theory it has to be low density, they can always come in and change it, but they're trying to change it, but.
But my point is, isn't this just sort of a guiding principle that we're talking about? So it's not.
I don't think maintaining our agricultural should be a guiding principle. Open space is great. If someone wants to make farm, that's great. I think it's, to me, the guideline is more of, if a property owner wants to continue their current uses, that they can do that.
Okay, well, I disagree.
Yeah, and Aaron, I guess I would ask you, do you think that maintaining farmland should not be a guiding principle anywhere in Fitchburg then?
Oh, that's a good question.
I think that, I guess probably not. I think that's something that if people want to, that's great, and I think that would be great if it is. But, and we got a lot of land to farm, and it's gonna take a long time that you'd ever develop that. However, you know, if you look at, we're a very unique city, no one farms in Madison, and that I think is a city, that's, no one farms in the city of Verona. They farm in the town of Verona. So I think to put that as a guiding principle, I think that's a nice thing to have, and that'd be great to have. And I think it's important to enable people to continue doing that if they want to do that. But to say that we're going to always have farming in Fitchburg, it's gonna be a really long time before there's no farming in Fitchburg, but.
Well, it is a guiding principle in our comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
And it's something that we've talked about a lot. The idea that not everybody wants to pave over every square inch of Fitchburg. That we want to identify some areas that are gonna be set aside for farming long-term and not developed, and whether that's in this neighborhood or not. I mean, I guess that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think what you're talking about, you know, contradicts the comprehensive plan, which says that we are gonna have farming in Fitchburg long-term.
And it's a really long time. I think part of it is that there's no mechanisms in place to help make farming feasible as well. If there were like things where purchasing developmental rights and some of the other things that I think are out there, they all cost money, which no one has.
Right.
And if those things were in place, then that's possible and a lot more feasible. But I don't know that it's feasible if there's no money behind it. And I don't know there's ever gonna be money behind that, except for people just wanting to not develop it, which is great. If they don't want to and they want to farm, that's awesome. I think that's great.
Well, I think if we take a survey of the citizens of Fitchburg and ask if they would, you know, like to see Fitchburg entirely develop the entire, you know, whatever's left of 36 square miles, I don't think too many people are gonna say yes to that.
Right.
So, I mean, again, is that part of this neighborhood? Is it surrounding this neighborhood? Is it the edges of this neighborhood?
Well, I don't see
That's
why it
what-
can't
that's
be
what
part
we're-
of this neighborhood. I don't understand why we can't include it as
Well,
part of this
we kind of
neighborhood.
jumped the gun. I thought there was something, and I didn't want to go wrong on my statement, but under sustainability, which is the next item, we did have something, and I was just tweaking it when we talked, but.
Okay.
So let's go here and then follow up with this conversation.
Okay.
So under sustainability, we had promote the use of diverse sustainable development practices, encourage the preservation of existing natural features and habitats, as well as the restoration of native plant communities. This is where I made some revisions here. Consider the historical significance of the neighborhood, especially opportunities to preserve the most productive farming fields and implementation of low-impact development techniques for infrastructure design. It's a mouthful.
I guess I would take out most productive only because then there's that comparison on, oh, that's not productive enough, so that's not, you know, I want to keep this, but oh, someone has deemed that your land isn't productive enough.
To just take out the word.
I would take
most.
out most productive.
Yep, totally agree. You gotta cross that out. That's the whole thing that drove us to this being a future development area in the first place. Somebody looked at a soil map and said, oh, this land isn't productive, and now we're stuck here with whoever's definition of that being the problem. So yes, cross that out, please.
Yeah, well, you know, Peter, that was only one consideration out of many that drove the mapping of this area, and transportation was a much stronger consideration than that. Where are the transportation corridors?
Yeah, again,
that was a
that also
consideration.
doesn't make sense because saying a train that ships concrete is a transportation mechanism is
Sure.
a silly thing that we put in that plan. But
Again,
either
I wanna
way,
keep
we don't
this
need to talk about that. I
productive
think the point is we shouldn't have the most productive be a thing that this committee or the city gets to have a
Yep.
say in.
It's been removed. It's on your screen.
I would remove productive too, actually,
Productive?
myself, that's me.
Sure, because the definition of that could change over time.
Right.
Okay. Does this resolve on the prior slide if we just talk about it in this framework? Does that work? As shown here?
I'd say the one other thing that I'd be interested in when it comes to sort of preserving agricultural land is there are other things besides the development rights or other things that we could be doing. We could be enabling smaller, plots of land to be able to maintain, maintain their zoning status as agricultural. Maybe there's mechanisms where people can have, a 3 to 5 acre farm that is agriculture and isn't taxed at a rate that makes it impossible to function on that scale. So that'd be another, policy-driven thing. I know that's not on the goals here, but a policy thing that we could recommend or ask the city to consider to allow us to enable ongoing agriculture, but maybe just that looks a little bit different than 160 acre farms.
I agree.
Yeah, that's our AS zoning, ag small, so there is zoning for that.
But we could put a policy that continues to encourage the allowable use of that.
What did you call that, Ed?
Yeah.
What did you call that?
AS.
And then the last one I have listed is under transportation. Avoid cutting off future regional transportation needs by ensuring the integration of future development within the existing transportation systems. Promote a transit-friendly neighborhood by prioritizing multimodal and safe transportation systems. And mitigate the impacts of the potential interchange on the existing neighborhood.
Does that assume that we are all in agreement that the interchange is a good thing? That last statement?
We're gonna have further conversation about an interchange. If it is remaining as in the plan, thought maybe a policy related to it is important.
So if we decide we don't like the concept of the interchange, that statement just becomes moot?
It's definitely a bigger question of where the steering committee lands on the recommendation, but ultimately it's the council's decision on the final plan adoption. So like I say, if it goes all the way to the end and it's no longer there, I would think that this is a moot statement.
I thought I thought Aaron, you told us the DOT is the one that makes really the decisions about interchanges and so forth, as driven by density and other things.
They determine where it is, but we have to apply for it, I believe is, Mike, you can probably correct me, but we have to request it. If we don't ever request it, they're not just gonna come and say you need to put an interchange in.
We had to request it and we have to pay for it, like we did last month. We paid for that.
But as we noted in previous meetings is we talked to the DOT and this like blew their mind that the idea that we're trying to think about impacts proactively instead of reactive to having traffic issues build up to the point that you're trying to push it into a neighborhood and disrupt it. And so I feel we're doing a good justice at least thinking about it and how it could impact future uses, but don't consider fully the uses only plausible based on the interchange, if that makes sense. So we want uses that in the concept and the future land use is plausible without an interchange, but we want to consider the uses, how it gets impacted if one is built.
Okay,
We'll touch it again when we look at concepts.
okay, because in all the concepts, you're showing us the interchange, so I don't know that I've seen a concept that doesn't have the interchange.
The initial
Maybe I've
bubble
overlooked it.
diagram A did not have one.
Right.
But again,
But the two
there's-
that you just sent us did.
Correct. So, outside of just what we do public meetings, we also talk to city staff and directions by the comp plan, and we have to think about all the balancing all this. And so I don't want to just dismiss it and say, here's your land uses, and then one gets built down the road because it's necessary. And so right now, it's gonna be the most impactful to show it.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
I don't know that this plan is going to decide for sure one way or the other. I think there's a lot more study that needs to be done before we are able to determine whether an interchange would be feasible and desirable, between Lacey and MM, so.
I don't think anybody here thinks it's desirable.
Well, I mean, part of the reason.
I know.
We've been, part of the reason that those are considerations is that there's this possibility of impacts. If the south side of the neighborhood develops, there's possible impacts to Sain Road, and having alternative, ways to get onto US 14 could mitigate that. So, I don't know,
I would disagree with that statement, but I hear what you're saying.
Well, I did talk to our mobility team, and that's kind of the next part. Did you want to speak?
I just wanted
Okay.
to mention that we had some internal conversations that the interchange is probably a bigger conversation geographically there, because right now we're only looking at the Fuda neighborhood on the west side of Highway 14. But we have at least two, if not, is it two Fuda neighborhoods?
There's
on the east
two
side
Fuda neighborhoods and one study area.
Yeah.
Is in between them.
that run on the east side of Highway 14. So one thing we just mentioned as collectively as staff is maybe there needs to be kind of a longer term kind of transportation analysis along that Highway 14 corridor that would say if these neighborhoods all for future urban development areas and would develop to some capacity, what would be the infrastructure that would be needed long term there? So that's where we kind of landed, just saying it's probably for future conversation and analysis and a transportation analysis along that whole corridor. It's probably something we really need if those FUDAs are going to remain there as we go through our major comp plan update next year. It's probably something that we really seriously have to have an analysis done for.
Steve, can you go back one slide? Just
Yep.
I had one question. What does avoid cutting off future regional transportation needs mean in this context? What are we concerned about?
Potential east-west arterial, between, the west side of Fitchburg and east side of Fitchburg, and the US Highway 14. That.
East-west is the concern. Got it.
Right, MM or B, comes into MM and it ends there right now. And, the Wayland ends at Fish Hatch, so like that's kind of the thinking there, that in the future, there may be a need for some more direct east-west transportation as Fitchburg develops, so.
Thanks.
Because the belt line functions great sometimes, right? Like my night, right? But I did want to hit a couple of things on that same point. Again, planning now for this interchange, we're talking 15, 25 years from now of that even becoming a real statement likely of ever being an option. So we're just trying, again, being proactive versus reactive to change. Gets a little smaller in text, but again, getting to that point about that east-west routing. So concept 2 has that potential of that east-west taking it north of the current neighborhood and any future traffic and pulling that out of the neighborhood. Yes, there's impacts to that landowner, but I'm just thinking globally bigger picture. If the concern is the increase that's been happening on Irish or Sayin, building a secondary road that's connected to this interchange would severely reduce the long-term impact to the neighborhood for growth around it and intentions for people to use this as a bypass route. So just, think about that bigger picture of how that could be impactful to the neighborhood. But also noted by Mike, and the benefits, that last one I highlighted, including east of the interchange. So while this planning process is purely about west side of 14, there's implications to future development due to the FUDAs to the neighborhoods to the east. And so this location is still an ideal location in talking about those neighborhood plans down the road, when those happen, about this location. Any questions, comments specific to that?
Have you considered M as your east-west? It's slightly below us, but I mean, that's open right now. And that could stay open for another 10 years without any trouble. And at some point, wouldn't that be a better alternative for shifting traffic of volume?
We were told during this process that they're already seeing increases on Irish Lane due to this. So that's just, people take the route or what their GPS tells them is the
Well, that's
quickest route.
because Sayin was closed for a while. So people take the easiest route that they can find. Before Sayin was repaired up above us, South Sayin was a racetrack. When they closed that for the construction, people found other routes, Irish Lane. And I think the same thing with Burn Road and Kane Road. When the northern end of Sayin was under construction, those got busier.
DOT does have a plan in place for a highway, south of M, to take the traffic from
South of M,
south of M.
in Oregon?
Ran parallel to M.
We also have one for the north belt line
Yep.
too.
Yeah.
So,
Might happen someday.
I don't want to get off track. I think this was the reasonings and thoughts about the interchange impacts and benefits and something we should factor in when we look at the concepts. I want to leave enough time to actually talk about the concepts and draw up on them. So again, also noting potential interchange, sorry, this is wrong statement on top, but the point is again that there would be an interceptor that is planned to extend to provide service again to the other neighborhoods, not just Greenfield, long-term. And thinking about stewards of the tax base, you don't want to put that infrastructure in for other neighborhoods and leapfrog yours, because that all impacts everyone within the city if we don't develop wisely, sustainably around that route and around. So it's just something to think about of completely cutting off this neighborhood is not ultimately great overall for taxpayers across the city if we don't think about development that supports that infrastructure. Also noted about issues along Curry Court related to stormwater from the east coming through there. Noted other issues, thoughts about impacts to heritage or old growth trees, Irish Lane specifically, and notable wetlands. The comp plan says in new service areas need a 300-foot buffer. So that's something we already have to kind of factor in what that means for development. Now I would say that there's a caveat to that about high quality wetlands versus just a convenience ditch that connects things. So there are some potential when you do development, those things could be just served differently because it's actually not quality plants in them and making it better function for the good wetlands. Kind of already hit on this. The only thing to note about is, do we talk about agribusiness park? So it's not just have to be specifically just any kind of business park. Could it be ag-related if there was incorporation of that? Here's again, people ask where do we pull these detailed concepts from? Option B was preferred, noted in black on each one of these. The main points is option A, which did not have an interchange. There was comments about wanting business park that wasn't incorporated in that. Option B, then the commercial and mixed use near Kane and way to the north was too much, and then in general too much on option C for the density, but noted there was some interest in the idea of the separate east-west road connection. In that concept, it was connecting to Nobel to the north. And noted in the green box there, in the detailed concepts, we are now looking closer with the land use impacts with overhead power lines that run through the northern half, so you'll see a green swath that's related to the overhead lines, as well as this buffering of 300 feet from the. So what you were sent in the memo packet is the larger image on the right. I just want to cover what has changed from the neighborhood meeting, which is in the lower left. So changes of high density south of Irish Lane were modified to medium high density. Provide an east-west connection extension to Nobel to the north that you see up there. And then close off Irish Lane intersection with the railway track east of Sain. Again, potentially show it still through, but in conversations, typically if you add a crossing, they're gonna want you to remove one nearby. Doesn't mean we couldn't continue showing it, but that there's still the strategy of maybe connecting to Nobel to the north if it ever does extend.
Are we gonna talk about that some more?
We can,
Is this the time?
we can do it now.
Okay, so my question is, could Nobel Drive bridge the tracks in Scion Road so that Irish Lane would not have to be, the crossing would not have to be vacated?
That's a fair thought there. There's financial impacts to that, but yes, I would think that would take away that concern of having to close Irish Lane.
Even then, if you did do that, you still could find a way to engineer it to make a connection to Scion.
That was my first
Right, that's
thought
what
was-
you'd want to figure out how to do that, but I think that's probably theoretically doable. But as long as you bridge the tracks, then that would solve that problem.
Be looking at acquiring the properties on each side where it crosses though, with.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We go to detail again when we bring these down on the table to talk more about, but just covering a little bit of the changes. And then the concept 2, previously that new road east and west at the neighborhood meeting went further to the north. This one brings it back once you get past, the major concern from Public Works was, as you know, along Irish, there's a lot of driveways in that stretch prior to where that road comes in, and that would be problematic long-term. So what this option does, again, is provides an east-west connection, pulling it out of the neighborhood. You see the green that gives that buffer zone from the existing neighborhood. We can talk about what density is north of there, but just the intent of the interchange is, and the road is bypassing the neighborhood. And it could actually extend further west and not come back right away. We could talk about that option as well, but it is pulling back sooner with comments that came in related to impacts to the north. Also, the east of the tracks, we already did kind of sketch in the neighborhood meeting where a road would go and a business park or agribusiness, if it were possible. Intended that could still remain farming as it is now, ag land, but to seeing the interest of long-term, if it does change hands or change directions, that's the likely outcome of interest, is to see potential business park east of the tracks, providing jobs, high-paying jobs, helps pay for infrastructure for the assessments of those lands. Other pieces is removing all the high-density residential that was west of the tracks. And then, but there was neighborhood mixed use at the intersection between Sayin and Irish and a little bit north. You see that peachy pink color that was in the neighborhood meeting. It's been revised to the medium-high residential with a couple corners of commercial option for that. And one that wasn't shared, but was something I worked on today actually, and follow-up conversation about how that interchange impacts current landowners. We had a concept at one point that pushed the interchange for the north of Irish, and that's what's presented here. Creates a little bit more straight line with that new east-west street. You can see some dashing on the east side of that interchange, how it could potentially connect actually down maybe to B versus completely replace Irish on that. Here I've actually moved all the commercial east of Sayin into that newer area and kept it as residential on the west side of Sayin in that same area.
But here again, then you've got to vacate Irish lane at the crossing, presumably, if you do this.
This one in long term, unless you grew up there or been there, this would revise it to seem natural, that change. And again, it's taking most of the traffic further north, but it still provides that access everyone has now. It just pushes it north. But yes, this would close it.
Okay, I see what you're saying, yeah.
And generally speaking, of both of these, or all three of them, you can see that light tan grayish color, that's still all that agrihood that could be continued to be farming or some pockets of low density residential within it through that kind of concept. Or it potentially could just be low density residential if those property owners desire that. But so that's still moving forward within this concept. Any direction we go, we still are showing those areas. We showed kind of an idea of that, if you can follow there, where you cluster homes in one area and you remain that remaining portion to be farming. But then, yes, we are seeing some residential densities that was in conversation even with property owners that had interest in long-term of seeing residential potentially. And so we are considering how that could be incorporated into a neighborhood. On still do show medium density residential, which is again 5 to 9 units per acre. We kind of went through some of those neighborhoods, so we can go back to that for reference before we get into drawing, but that's not saying to a scale that is very large, any multifamily buildings at all. You do see, it's a small form, but there are alleys in these 4 blocks, so that is the idea that these can be, even though it's medium high density, they could be single family. It just means they're a little tighter lots in that section.
Going back to the interchange in road just for a minute here.
Sure.
So, would there be a way, once that interchange goes in, if people wanted to access not the interchange in the highway, but actually wanted to get over to MM and go in that way, will they still be able to do that, or is that going to be pretty much cut off?
I'm not showing it in this version, but you would always have Irish Lane connected into this new road no matter what to get over there, sorry. And so you're saying to the east, correct?
Yeah, because one thing that people do is they don't want to necessarily travel on the freeway because it's 70 miles per hour. So they go over and they take, north into Madison. I don't know that we're going to necessarily always be able to change human behavior about what people want to do when they're intimidated about taking the freeway with 70 mile per hour speed limit and people are going 80, 90 sometimes and they're semis. They're gonna maybe want to still have MM as an option.
Yeah, so Irish to the east would still connect into it. Possibly this road actually connects back to MM where B is. There's also this secondary route, if this was ever built, that connects all the way up to Lacey to the north off Blaney, all the way down to Byrne to the south, and those all provide those same access points.
And it's most likely that if an interchange were to go in, it's gonna have a road from both sides feeding it.
That's what I would hope.
Yes, yes.
So
it'll be very similar to like the Sherrill or the Lacey interchange where, you can go over over 14 to.
So if there's any more specific questions about the concepts we had, otherwise I have a few questions just to think about when we go into this exercise. If we want to actually put it on the table and talk about some modifications, I apologize for those that are online that might, maybe I can try to show a little bit what we're talking about, but so these exercises, what are the strengths of the current plans, strategies that you feel will bring positive impacts to your neighborhood? What are your main concerns with the current proposal concept? What are the best strategies for managing traffic increases in and around the neighborhood? How to allow for enough development to manage tax base? Do you want to see some nearby commercial and or job opportunities? Those are the big questions to think about that we were thinking about in drafting this, is not just thinking about individual property owners, but thinking the best outcome for the neighborhood and the city in general. And so these are big, heavy questions and something that we should weigh if we're going to completely alter what we're presenting to you today. Any comments on that, or did I miss something that we should be thinking about too? Okay.
Okay, well, I'll start.
Okay.
When you talk about main concerns, I guess the main concern that I have is that I don't understand how these concepts work when we're talking about basically 4 or 5 large landowners' land. So back in the beginning, if you can pull up one of the plans.
Yep, looking at it.
Back in the beginning of this, you really talked about how the driver here is that there are some big properties that ultimately might want to be sold by the current landowners, and that those are kind of gonna be the drivers of future development. So for example, if you have a property, that's hard to see.
Yep.
You have the property up at the corner of Irish Lane and Kane Road. So let's say that one sells and somebody wants to develop it. but all of the other stuff wants to remain as it is. How does that work with your proposal for new roads and changing the whole kind of tenor of the Greenfield neighborhood in general? Is that making any sense?
I'm trying to,
You don't wanna sell, but you wanna run a road through her property.
okay?
Kind of.
So I would say,
But I'm probably not the only person that feels that way, because you got roads going all over the place through my neighbors' properties, and you're making assumptions with this plan that aren't necessarily accurate.
so road network and these concepts are primarily about major connections from point A and B. And so yes, we are showing one with Hill Drive, for instance.
Right.
That is a decision that we might want to talk about if that goes through or not. But the more localized to the west of that is just a showing of a pattern of potential development type that kind of fits a vision. We can talk about if that vision needs to be modified. But with the road networks, it's really about the major connections. That is more of a, we need to connect A and B. It
So
can
you're talking about
maneuver different ways to get there.
Irish, the bigger
Yes.
connectors.
And I'll point out too that this doesn't assume that everyone will want to do it at the same time.
Right.
What it assumes though, or what it does is it sets up a guide so that if the corner property sells and develops, they know that, you know, maybe the next owner would want to sell for development or something, that that future connection gets reserved. So it doesn't, we don't have a bunch of pockets of internally connected neighborhoods that don't connect to each other or
Right,
not
but
connect.
to me, that's what would happen in this kind of planning.
When it's
In the
platted,
short
they
term.
would require you to leave the extension to the proper plat
To the next
edge
property, yeah.
so that next developer would be required to match it. If you don't, if you just close it off, then you just don't, you won't ever have that connection. So it would be, if there's a primary road within the policy we talk about that should be connected, and this one is a discussion item, Hill Drive. That one is definitely noting the idea that you're connecting Kane into the neighborhood. If that's something of interest to have connectivity within the neighborhood, potentially another park that may be to the west, then we would want to keep that in here as a main point of connection. If we feel that that should be disconnected and we have an agreement that that's the best result, and maybe it's just a passive connection for pedestrians, that's the bigger thing, is does Hill Drive connect? Do we connect from the south end that you see all the way into the neighborhood? These individual decisions of how it's laid out within each property is just giving an idea of balance of unit types and character that could be possible, but it's not setting in stone. Does that help at all?
Sort of.
Okay.
They'll always have at least one connection to the main arterial to start, and there's gonna
Right,
probably
well, that
be
makes
one
sense.
stuff. No developer's gonna buy it if they can't get access to any of the current roads.
Right. No, I get that.
So let's start there. What are the thoughts of having these two connections from Kane through some type of development to reach the neighborhood to provide greater access to other amenities that may happen? We're showing a lot of preserved open space, and maybe there's trails that are incorporated into that. And giving you another direction out for you, because generally speaking, the way your layout is currently in the neighborhood, I should say the neighborhood is very jumbled. There's not a straight line through. So the reality is, most likely people are not going to, and GPS is not going to tell them to take that route through the neighborhood to get through it.
Right.
Unless everything's blocked.
But I think you could argue that that's what gives that neighborhood character, that it has kind of those spokes that are dead ends, that it isn't a pass-through neighborhood. And I think that's what I hear a lot is people saying they want to preserve that kind of character. We don't necessarily want to build new roads to go through just so we can get to the grocery store easier. That's sort of what I am hearing from a lot of folks. So I don't know, that's a thought that I had.
If you're starting with this quadrant first, I went and analyzed these two concepts based on kind of the quadrants, and we're starting with, you know, the southwest quadrant first. I guess one question that I have is, you have the the agricultural land in the middle. I do feel there needs to be some sort of road in and out of there to help people with their farm equipment or whatever. I mean, you have to look at it sort of realistically like that, and there needs to be, roads for the people in the developments to get out, because they're not gonna each have little driveways. I'm not sure about it, the road going into, from, Courtney's property. I think that's something that needs to be more discussed. But, I mean, there has to be some access ways, and we need to understand this is gonna happen for a while, and not everybody's going to sell. Like, for instance, the Kinneys, they still have some interests, and, I mean, you've got some orange in there, that's partly their land, they may not want to sell for a while. At the bottom of there, there's some other people that have residences, and that's in a medium-high development, and it's just they've just been sort of, I hate to say it, kind of obliterated by the coloring there, and I just think that they need to have there needs to be some recognition in the plan that there's actual people with houses there.
Right.
I just wanted to baseline again, mention, if I'm getting repetitive, and I'm sorry if it's not following through, is that the current users of the property can remain. This is, when this becomes in play for Plan Commission and Council, is if someone actively comes forward with an application for rezone or redevelopment. And then at that point, they're like, well, what does the map say? It says you should not go beyond the ratio of 5 to 9 units per acre in this area.
I understand that, I appreciate you saying that again. It's just that, I was talking with Dan about this too. When these were presented to the committee of the whole, just as circle diagrams, they kind of looked at it and started picking it apart as if it's some sort of proposed development in the works. And and our elected representatives from District 4 were not on hand. And the conversation kind of went off the rails. And I was like really disturbed by the comments they made and the tone in which they made them. I just think that, we need to have recognition that if this is going to unfold over time, I guess, I don't want to get too much into the other quadrants yet, but I know that the business park thing and the septic interceptor, I mean, we're gonna need to talk about that as well, because the Haas family, they could sell shortly, or it could be years, it could be over a decade, 20 years. And we were basing, a business strategy on land that has not been, sold yet. That's a little bit disturbing. The city is leaning on us for more and more housing, and I'm wondering if we, the high density housing, for instance, that's in the bottom there of the southeast quarter, and put that up towards closer to where the Lacey interchange is, then some housing would be developed right away, and that might take some of the pressure off. But right now, I am feeling a great deal of pressure coming from the city council on this process, and Deanna and I have gone back and forth about whether it really should be happening at all, or whether we should be allowed to sort of do what we feel is best. But I don't want to lock the Haas family either into having to sell to a commercial developer to do a park. I think it's their land, and I think they should decide if they're going to be residential or is it going to be business. I don't want to tie their hands.
We haven't heard a response, so we
I
can't
know.
get that feeling. But again, just come back to your point of the medium density. Again, it's the balancing of everything with
Right.
infrastructure and maintaining the low density here in that large part of the neighborhood is part of the thought of where there could be a little bit, not high density, medium density. That's why it was shown along Keene. Again, not pushing out neighbors that exist there. It's if they ever were to choose to want to sell and develop, that it's allowing for it to be a little bit denser than it is currently.
But would that be, let's get back to the main point here, which is owner control of their land. Those 3 houses or residences would then be able to develop to medium high density. But what if they wanted to just sell to other homeowners or sell to a developer that's going to do a lower density? Do they have that option?
They would have to get approval. So that's something I think is important to know, is that we've always restricted what people can do with their land. For example, just right kitty corner from here, the radio station property is for sale. It's been for sale for 3 or 4 years now, and it's zoned at low density residential. They have it priced where you can't afford to do low density residential, and we've had people come in and ask, hey, can we make this high density? And so far we've said no. Now that's on the city council and the mayor to continue to say that. So, you know, we do restrict a little bit of what people can do. Now, we don't say it has to be this type of housing, but we do say it has to be low density residential. And that's an example of right now it's low density residential. They're trying to get the money where no developer could make money on it as low density residential. So until they bring down their price, it's not going to sell unless the council says, okay, it's okay to raise the density on here. And that's something that I think is important to know too, is that you know, what we put in this plan and gets approved can still change. And that's part of the reason why I prefer option 2 between the 2 options, because it takes out the high density for now. But I can tell you, and this is important for everyone in here to hear, some developer will come in and try to make some of this high density. That doesn't mean it'll get approved, but someone will come in and try to do it. I don't know that anyone's ever come in to try to reduce the density, but people come in all the time to increase the density.
I mean, you need to be aware of that. And bring up a good point. You know, in the current council, a large number of the alders, me included, you know, favor owning high density. My fear is, you know, we have this plan, and someone wants to sell, and the developer, you know, says, well, I pay this much, I can only do high density in there before the council. So that's, you know, those of you that know, you've talked to me about this, and that's my fear. You know, the character of your neighborhood is low density. We have to have growth in the city, that's a given, but that's the fear that I share, and there's not much I can do about it, to be quite honest with you.
And I think, I mean, that's, you know, Peter talked about wanting to have 1 housing unit per acre. Well, if you do that instead of 5 houses per acre, you're gonna get maybe 20% of the value that you would otherwise. It's probably less than that, actually, because there's economies of scale. So, you know, part is on the landowner to, you know, and they can do this, they can make I would guess, make some kind of deal with whoever's developing it that, okay, we want acre, half acre lots. The city doesn't care for that because they want a little higher density than that, but you only get 20, if you're gonna get $1 million, you get $200,000 for your property, or maybe even less than that. So, you know, that's also a landowner to say, okay, I'm willing to take a heck of a lot less money from the developer. And that's where the economies become really difficult for someone to do a half acre property, because the land can be this price or it can be this price. And people are gonna try, if they're selling, there's a reason they're selling, and
Oh, I have
so
no
that's
doubt
where you
there's a
get
business
challenged.
case for going
Yeah.
at a higher density. I'm not disputing that. It's just
Yeah.
that we received an email last night from, Peter's mother, saying that when she was interviewed, she had said she wanted a lower density, larger lot situation going on. And I was a little bit concerned that that was not incorporated into these concepts, because I do think we need the cooperation of the property owners. And we need to take in consideration also the cost of the infrastructure. The fact that on the northeast quarter, and this is one reason why I was thinking that maybe we should have high density be in that top corner, just for a parcel, and then shift down the commercial the business park, is because we're putting in a septic interceptor at a cost of $1.5 million. And that is only going down to Irish Lane. That's not even going down further south, and it's not going over on Irish Lane. And so I think it's very high probability that if the Haas family were open to selling land, they might sell everything at once, or they might choose to sell one parcel at a time, and we won't know which parcel they want to sell. But if they're gonna sell a parcel at the top, again, that would put those people in a high-density neighborhood where we could get them onto Lacey Road, where we could potentially get them bus service. There's responsibilities with high density that I don't think maybe council realizes, and one of them is to get people attached to Madison Metro bus service, and Madison Metro makes its own decisions. We can't compel Madison Metro to put in a bus route per se that we don't subsidize.
Money you can, yeah.
That we subsidize, yeah, so, that's why I'm leaning more towards, the concept number one, because I think for me, it's a little bit of an easier sell to the neighborhood. It's a little bit more of what they're used to. And it does have that rural residential on the west side. In the southwest quadrant, I had another public works question, which is, so we have the septic interceptor coming down on the right side. How are we going to get people on the southwest corner? Is there just gonna,
Yeah, I had that
get
same
them
question.
into the septic interceptor, or do we allow them to have septic tanks and develop there on that medium stretch? And that's coming down a hill.
No, we're not doing septic.
But who pays for that?
We do,
Everybody.
yeah. The developer does and passes through to the future property owners.
And what about the existing property owners? I mean, is there an assessment as it comes through?
Yes, there is.
And it's probably gonna be a pretty big one.
Yes.
Certainly would.
And so why would anyone think that would be acceptable to the existing homeowners who have perfectly good functioning septic systems and
And I think that was one
that's a
of,
hard sell.
yeah, it is. And I think that was one of the considerations, at least to,
Most of the homeowners in that area will have to rebuy their houses just with the septic assessment, with the area assessment. Most of those homeowners will have to rebuy the house they live in. Take out a mortgage for that full amount of the value just to pay the assessment.
For the sewer.
It's gonna cost as much as the big.
Oh, okay, that's what you mean by rebuy.
Yep. Take a mortgage out for the value of the house just to pay the septic.
That's why the developer should pay.
That's what the developer paying. That's what
You
we're
do
above the
understand why
developer.
there's pushback on that.
I don't know.
I guess that was
That's
part and
something-
parcel of my concern about, suddenly this one parcel sells and now everybody's gotta pay to get
Feed that.
sewer
Well, even if they
there.
sell, I mean,
You
the
better-
point of them they have to have access to the utilities, so they're not gonna likely be able to develop without it. And if they're really far from it, they're not likely gonna pay for that to get there yet. I
So,
don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but that's,
I think it is a very long term.
so it's a little chicken and egg then, kind of, which comes first?
And I think it'd be up for the council as well to have a time frame when houses would have to connect to whatever goes in, because you can't just say right away, and it's up to the council to say people have 5 years or 10 years, because some people's sewers septic will fail, in which case they're
Yeah.
gonna wanna connect to it.
Not
But it's just-
necessarily, they may just
well.
wanna replace it. I mean,
It's gonna cost, but anyway,
because
that's
I don't wanna
council,
jump
that's
into
beyond this.
too far, but I don't know, Tracy, if you want to.
She's smarter
I
than
just-
that.
I just, staff recognizes that there's not an easy solution. The city administrator has tasked us with exploring some alternative options for what that might mean for existing homeowners. We're not there yet to provide.
I'm guessing we've never connected a neighborhood this big to
I've-
sewers. and
Yeah, I've
water.
reached out to my contacts in the region. There's no precedent.
Oh, in the whole region?
That,
Oh,
that seems kind of integral to the whole thing that we're talking about, so
That should be talked through first instead of all this other stuff.
yeah, kinda.
You would have an area assessment that would go out the whole area in order to extend that sewer. That's an area assessment that would go, and then as pieces are developed, the developer is gonna pay their share. The question is how you fund that and how they pay that back. But that's the area assessment. Don't forget, Over and above the area assessment, when it comes by your house, you got the front footage assessment to pay in addition to the area assessment. So you get paid twice, you gotta pay twice.
And it doesn't hook you up.
Can I make a correction? So a lot of times when we go through neighborhoods with existing residential homes, McGaw, Dahmer's is a good example where Aaron lives. We did a per lot assessment on that, so everybody, because they're all residential, single family residential homes. So then it wasn't based on area, it was just based on each lot to make it more, to balance that out. The area assessment I think that you might be referring to is the interceptor itself.
I am.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of what that cost is today, going by your house is expensive because you're paying the actual cost to install that main right adjacent to the property. But the interceptor itself, the 36-inch interceptor that would go in it, serves a massive area. And today that rate for, like say for a single family residential home, it's based on usage, not on area. MMSD is based on area. And that's a different one, we'll come to that. But the sign interceptor today is about $450 to $500 per single family residential lot. I think maybe what you're referring to is MMSD's fee. So MMSD has interceptors through Fitchburg. They treat our sewer, right? And everybody that connects to MMSD has to pay a fee for their treatment and it charges them for those interceptors that go through Fitchburg. And that is based on area. And that is a larger cost than our interceptor itself. So there's three different costs when sewer comes in.
Is there an interceptor going in on Irish and Sign? I've been told by 3 different people in the city. So what you say, I hope you've read their notes and stuff because it's exactly.
Okay. So the interceptor that we have proposed right now will go through the Hartford property to the south property, and that is proposed for next year. And then we have money.
You're almost impossible to hear.
So,
Yeah.
so the money we have in the budget, right, or the interceptor that we have proposed right now, the extension goes to the Hartton property, and it stops at the southern border of the Hartton property. In 2028, we have money in the budget again for an extension, and that's just a whole replacement this time, and that would take it to Irish Lane. That's where we're at.
Is that area assessed? That's 37 feet deep, is that area
So
assessed?
it's usage assessed, the interceptor is, so it's based on usage. So when a development comes in and let's say they have 37 single-family residential homes, they would pay a fee per single-family residential home.
But who pays that contractor to put that 37-foot deep pipe to Irish Lane?
So initially the city does, right?
Okay,
And then
so that's us.
Yes. So then everybody who connects to it then pays their proportionate share based on the usage type. So if they're single family or whether it's multifamily, commercial, industrial, and that's based on, so a single family home, for example, they use maybe 135 gallons per day on average. It would be based on that type of usage. Whereas Sub-Zero, they might use, not Sub-Zero to pick on bigger, an industrial facility may use, 50,000 gallons per day. That'd be a lot. Their fee would be based on that usage.
And who pays for bringing the sewer into the Greenfield Park neighborhood?
So then that would be the adjacent property owners, yes.
And how much is that?
Depend on what the cost is and, the distance that we're.
What's a ballpark per lot?
And the developer on the west end ever get charged for the sewer that's in my front yard? Because that's why it's there for.
I think this is a conversation we can continue, but I don't want to lose track of what we're trying to accomplish tonight. And it says 7:15, I know I was a couple minutes late, so I mean, everyone's time here. We could get the drawing, or if we want to just pick a few things, big picture that we want to see changed, or what you liked, I can go either way. Which way you want to go? Like, main things for me are connections into the neighborhood. You can see that this one, if you're talking about fortuitous routes, if this was connected, you see this one actually connects where it isn't straight out to Kane, for instance. I mean, it's not as choppy as the existing neighborhood, but it's not a direct line into the neighborhood. While Wayland here which is more of a, could be a long-term connection way west, is connecting the neighborhood versus in the other concept, it's not at Wayland, right? It's halfway between Wayland and Irish. So those are the big picture things that I would like to get a response to from the committee about, does that need a change? We can talk about the uses adjacent to it, but that's one big factor is access into the neighborhood.
So one question that I would have is, from Wayland to Irish, if there's an interceptor running to the west on Irish, you can gravity sewer. But the stretch that is shown as medium density south of Wayland Road would not. And so where does that gravity sewer to? Through that other road that you're showing there and through the neighborhood?
There's a white elephant or an elephant in the room here. That could be a conversation that hasn't been a typical practice of Fitchburg.
Lift station?
Yeah, but I'm not saying we need to go there yet. I think that's the next step of the process.
I guess what I'm thinking overall is that the density really should be where the transportation is. And Aaron and I are gonna disagree on this, but I believe that Fitchburg should establish urban growth boundaries. And in this case, that urban growth boundary may be Kane Road, because there's only so much that this interceptor is gonna be able to handle. And we want to go further south too, and we want to be able to handle that as well. To put the higher densities along the transportation corridors. So I would go low density or nothing as you get further to the west on this. And then the other plan that you had that showed Blaney coming down and connecting to Byrne, that allows more land that is nearer to the transportation to develop. Now, maybe that's not all commercial. Maybe that's long-term residential, some multifamily for mixed use, whatever it might be further to the south there. But to me, it does make sense to run Blaney down and to focus the density there rather than on the west side where there's gonna be a high cost to get that sewer to make it work. And if you want to establish an urban growth boundary, you should be feathering the density away. And have a lot less density toward the edges. And that's really how smart code works too.
Will you explain what an urban growth boundary looks like?
An urban growth boundary would be a line that we do not cross.
It's literally a line.
Yep, a line that we do not cross.
That's essentially what these fooders are now. That's the urban growth boundary.
So right now it's Kane Road, basically.
Yeah.
It used to be the power line.
And I will say.
Yeah, it used to be the power line, right?
It used to be the power line.
And that changed. And these things, they can change, but,
They don't have to.
They don't have to, no. If you put a good plan in place, which with our comp plan, I think that is a good plan. And I think we should stick to it. And if you're gonna stick to it, then you do really want to establish at some point, where are these growth boundaries? How far are we gonna go? Unless we're gonna develop every square inch of Fitchburg, we do need to establish, all right, what is it that we're not gonna develop? What is it that we're gonna say, this is part of Fitchburg, this is rural, this is agriculture, we're gonna keep it that way. We don't know what agriculture is gonna look like 200 years from now, but that's what it's gonna be.
20 years from now. Who establishes those? The plan committee? That's not the purview of this particular
Well,
committee.
it's really the council that makes the final decision, but, we as this steering committee, we get to make a recommendation on this little area. And whether we want it to fit in with what our comp plan says, or whether we want to devise something that is going to eventually push growth further to the west, further away from the traffic arterials, I don't think that makes sense, but not everyone needs to agree with me, so.
And what I did hear, Elizabeth, you were mentioning, like in this concept, I did change this to commercial or business park. What's not in here is there a portion that could be residential? Maybe this bottom portion down here you're alluding to could be. But the idea that there's this north-south continuation up to Blaney, all the way to Lacey, all the way down to Byrne, is a routing and a transportation route, and it could or could not be connected to an interchange that's right here. So,
and that's your alternative, I mean, that's really your primary collector street, and if you never get that interchange, it's gonna work, is that, it's gonna, and you may never get the interchange, and so you can plan for getting the interchange, but you also gotta plan for the, which you are, what you're
Okay.
trying to do, that we may never get it.
Okay, and then I speak up here, having talked to people that own property in that area. I don't think they're not gonna go for a road through the bottom portion.
And that's
of that
okay,
anytime
and you don't
soon.
sell the land, and it doesn't happen.
Well, then you can wait 20, 30, 40 years, and
Yep.
I think this is a problem because this is very confusing to the council. They think that this is going to happen. And, yeah, Aaron, they were really off the rails last cow session. And I think we need to take into consideration, people talked about farmland preservation and so forth. I don't wanna stand in the way of something that's happening 20, 30 years out. I just have talked to people, today I talked to somebody and he's probably gonna be farming for a long time to come. And so we can say hypothetically, this is not going to happen, but then he talked to me, he knows something about real estate law, he talked about eminent domain. And so that road, if that's for the public common good, what's to say that the city isn't gonna force him to put that road through his property to get down to Burke?
Can the city implement eminent domain? I thought it was just a state. The city can.
That's why it's very important on who you vote for, council and mayor.
So again, I think we're saying if landowners are willing, or ultimately a decision is made down the road, a north-south connection east of the tracks supports reduction of impact to the neighborhood. And infrastructure-wise, as noted, that's a primary route for the interceptor, great opportunity to connect if someone is willing to do it. I think what I'm hearing is lower density in the southwest corner than what's shown in both concepts. I still think ultimately, if there is an interchange, or even not, what I'm hearing is the traffic on Irish, I really think this is an interesting consideration of this pulling away from the neighborhood, having a green buffer, and either this continues or it comes back to Irish Lane as shown here, once it's past all the driveways in the existing neighborhood. That if this intersection happens without the interchange even, it still has the opportunity to have commercial or business park.
And I like this option for a number of reasons. I think that, for me, it makes a lot of sense along Highway 14 to have commercial, and the Agra business park would be great as well. I don't think you don't put housing along 14. People do it, but it's not great to have that in your backyard. If the lower left quadrant is more low residential, I think that's fine with me. And like I said earlier, I think it's good to not have high density residential in this, because I think that matches better with what's there. And like I said before, someone's gonna try and make it higher density anyway, just be aware of that. But to me, I really like where this is. I think if we treat the corner, that's fine. I think that, to me, we also have a huge need for more commercial property, and Mike Zimmerman can talk about that all day long if you want him to. But we do have people who come into Dane County, frankly, and they ask, okay, where in Dane County are there big parcels of land, because they want to move businesses here, and we don't have anything large. We've got some medium size, but not large. And so I think there could be some interesting things there. But if it was agribusiness, maybe an neighborhood does work on that, most especially the southern part of that business park. But between the two, I guess I would prefer this for those reasons.
Just be aware that our present city council wants us to turn into Madison South. They want a house on every lot, they want them stacked, and they want them behind them. Just be aware of that, because that's where they're going. They don't listen to what we say, they haven't for a long time, and they're not going to in the future. They have their mind set up, including our mayor, that we should be Madison South. And that's what this directive basically is. Turn us into Madison South. Keep pumping houses in until you can't move. Oh, and then if you get them in tight enough, then we can pay for a bus.
I got a question for you. up on the top in this drawing that's up there, is that the proposed Noble Drive extension? Way at the top up there.
In this one, it's connecting to Blaney.
No, to your left.
That is from we just put in what was in that McGaw neighborhood plan. So that's
Okay,
not any
that's-
change of.
Okay, that's in the McGaw one. That's the
Correct.
one that puts the road through the Stoneman.
Correct, so I'm just showing how it ties into that
Just
neighborhood.
let me state that again. That's the one that puts the road through the Stoneman family home.
Understood. Outside the scope of this project, but understood. Others from the committee of, if we lower the density in the southwest quadrant, again, big picture, is this an idea, this east-west, moving it north? Interchange or not, we have this potential north-south access to Blaney down to Byrne. Is there something you're concerned with?
I think, can I just say something? I just feel like we're going through this really, really fast. And that, I know that that's sort of, it's already 7:30. I told Deanna I didn't think we were gonna get through this mapping exercise thing in an hour, and I still don't. I looked at this for several hours. I've got 5 pages of questions and comments. And this is really deeply concerning to me because I think the neighborhood has expressed at their public sessions how they feel. There's still a great deal of anxiety. They don't maybe understand development over time.
Close those windows.
We could have a tornado here and it could intercept it. We just need more sessions, and I know that this is, from what I heard today, the 2 fooders are costing the city a large amount of money, and I appreciate that. But it's like you want us to do 30, 40 years of development in an evening, and there's no way we can do it. And I tend to be conservative. I tend to lean more towards concept 1, having spoken to actual property owners. I get back to that. As I said before, I just think that they're going to want some residential, on the east side. It puts in some farm preservation in the southeast border, so that is important to me. It's there. The property owners that I've spoken to are in no rush whatsoever to develop. And I think that these things need to be updated. We're, here with 2024. The Irish Lane review is in 2027, 28. The septic interceptor is going in 2030. 10 years from now, we're probably going to have to revisit this whole situation because different people will want to develop, other people will still be out of the whole development cycle. So if we put together this picture, I agree with you, Steve, that there's some large issues regarding traffic and so forth that we definitely need to consider, and densities and whatever. But I also think that I don't know that this committee will necessarily have a huge impact on what's going to happen, because it's going to happen over time when people sell. I do think we need some upper caps, like medium high as opposed to high density, because as Aaron was saying, yes, people are going to try to go for high density. And so to have that in place, for instance, on the Frostwood Farms patch, and we tried to get them to talk to us, to the committee, to tell us what their long-term plans are. They haven't really communicated. When they decide to sell, having medium high density there at least lets us know that they might try for high density, but the committee will have said, no, we really think medium high is better for the area. So I think we can make some decisions tonight, but I think this is still in flux and a work in progress. And, the community survey is coming up, and people are going to have a whole bunch of things to say on that community survey. So I think we need to meet after the community survey, too, and take that into effect. So I am making a plea here that this not be the last meeting of this meeting. Please, City Council.
No, there's going to be 3 more steering committee meetings still, I think, after the survey.
Okay.
We had 6 originally. This is an additional one now. So
Okay.
that's 7 total, and I think we're on number 4, so.
Okay.
When is the survey coming again? I know you told us.
So we gotta determine now, we keep moving the needle on this, so that would be our next steps, is a survey and a public meeting, or general public. We had neighborhood meetings, so it'll be a public meeting. So if we want to work in how that fits into more of our meetings, and the intent was at some point to get to a land use design to look at the engineering portion and answer questions on utilities, traffic, and all that. So no, this doesn't have to be the final word. I was just trying to get some gauges, and what I'm hearing still is actually this western half of what's seen here, that southwest, everything south of Irish and west of Said might be a direction that's most comfortable from what I'm hearing for that area. I still think there's some influx to talk about north of Irish and east of the tracks of possibly something towards the other concept, but this doesn't have to be the end. You guys wanted to have more of a working session. We didn't get the drawing anything on it, but so that's why I wanted bigger picture answers here.
Yeah, no, and I know because when you, in your survey, you may be doing some things like asking questions, how would you feel about this type of density along Irish Lane or whatever, and show a picture, whatever.
Who's writing the survey? Are you guys writing the survey questions?
Yes.
Does the committee have input on the survey questions? Because what you ask and how you ask it can be obviously influential. Just curious.
I would say if there's information that you're looking for, just to ask for those types of questions, but I don't know that maybe people on this committee have experience in drafting questions. I'm pretty sure you've done it a lot.
Well, I can provide it if there's a window to provide some comments to Brad to put it together of overall intent of what should be changed, but don't be mad if it's tweaked or not included.
No. I'm just curious. What are you trying to divine from this survey? Whether people want development or not, or what kind of development, or have you talked about it, or?
It's going to be reactions to the concepts, and it is a bigger picture again about connections through and.
So you'll show some of these on the survey,
Yes.
like what's your reaction to?
Yes. Yes, we did this for the Southstoner, the other neighborhood, and I can't remember what the number was of responses, but we had a decent turnaround of that. But yes, the concepts are included. I could share that one, and you can give feedback on how that.
Oh, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
That's on it is posted now, I think, on the Southstoner Prairie Neighborhood Plan page. I know the results are posted, so I think the questions are all included.
For now, we can provide it, and if that's something that you'd want to look at soon, then give feedback on that, how we frame this one. That's more helpful on the front end than react.
That's a good point.
Is that open to everybody, or is it just open to the people that are living in that area?
The survey is open to everyone, but there'll be qualifiers of demographic information of who's taking the survey.
Like, do you live in Greenfield, or do you live or work in Greenfield, or do you live like a mile out or more? And they also divided the last survey by zip code. So the 53719, you can see how many people 53719 answered versus 53711. So stuff like that. It was pretty, I think, informative. And if you go to that, the last meeting I think was in March of the Southstoner Prairie neighborhood. Steve did a great job unpacking that for the committee members, just going through it and explaining the answers. So that's available to everybody to watch what the results were. Yeah.
So I guess the bigger question is there anything specifically here that's like 1,000 times not even should be out to the public to react to that we need to modify? Otherwise, let's do the survey, let's do it open house, and then we'll get back together.
The two things I don't think should be on there, I don't think the interchange should be on there because we don't have control over it. I know people have said that over and over again, but I think having the interchange here does not make sense, and I know there's been lots of debate on it. The second thing is in concept 2, the road going through Irish Lane being a different path should not be open to the public because that's just not going to happen. Because it's going to require eminent domain, it's going to require people taking things, it's going to require putting a road through my backyard, which we're not going to do. So it's like planning the Nobel Drive thing. It's like, we're not going to move the farmhouse, we're not going to sell that. It's very, very silly that for 25 years the city's been pretending like that's going to happen. And it would be very silly to pretend like we're going to move Irish Lane 400 feet over. It's not going to happen in the next 50 years. If I'm alive, that will not happen.
Over his dead
So
body.
it's just like, there's no reason to include it. We shouldn't do it. It's not going to happen. It's very silly to ask a bunch of people to react to something that is a physical possibility for the city to do unless you're physically taking my land from me using legal means.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
That's
I
a line
appreciate your
and I agree,
design.
100%.
Again, I don't know why,
I hear what you're saying.
that's my hard line on that.
You could argue the same for the concept road extending Blaney as well, I think.
You could argue that with regard to any of this, but if we don't do this now, then we'll be reacting when someone does want to develop and there's no concept plan in place.
I get
That's the
that.
problem.
I get that, but you also, by presenting these ideas, you're encouraging somebody to do it, a future developer.
As opposed to telling them,
this is what the city requires you to do, is to put this road.
To do something else.
Right.
By doing that, and I've said this before, it's, it happened on my dad's farm. When the city changed the zoning from ag exclusive to ag transitional, it was just like the varmints coming for a roadkill when the developers swooped in, and they will come. Just like that. And that's what happened. That's why that farm is no longer there.
I'll say, again, the north-south Blaney discussion, if it can't go all the way south now, it's still something to consider in the future, wanting to get reaction from the general public. I don't think we'll make sure it's disclaimer and very clear that this is not moving forward. This is just a visionary of interest in getting reactions to the general public, the neighborhood, people that don't live here now that might want to move to the community. I think that's still something to consider. Understand, yes, there would need a major change for that east-west, but the interchange, if it happens or doesn't happen, is not really privy to these two roads. And even if the interchange went in, it could run north-south only and not even go east-west. But we're just looking at down the road, if something changes with property owners that are adjacent to that road, then there's something to have a discussion on.
Like I said, disagree with the interchange, Irish Lane, Irish
Yeah, I
Road,
know.
and that's fine, but, making that change so it doesn't go through, your property. I do think it makes sense to at least have it as a potential, because there is a good potential of needing that, and
For the interchange.
for the interchange, yep. And like you said, that it's pretty rare that people actually think this far ahead, and I think doing that can help in the long, and whoever has to make the decisions in 10, 20 years.
Why did the city of Fitchburg, the last 5 years, what were they thinking about shoving heavy-duty traffic? I got traffic on Irish Lane more than Lacey does, 24/7. And the best part of it is, no stoplights, no stop signs, it's a drag fest. Anything from 11 o'clock until 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, now it's summertime, which is the worst time. But I have, I don't know who planned this in the city, because they're awful. Irish Lane was not made for semis. And the only way that happened is when you guys screwed up this north. When you opened that up, there should have been signs that all the big trucks are not allowed on Irish Lane. And there's 3 of us that are waiting for the picture when a fire truck or a semi takes out the corner electrical post. You guys did not ever think that semis were gonna come down Lacey and they're gonna have to take all 4 lanes. If you're seeing a semi trying to wait.
That's outside of the scope of the study. Let's get back to the concepts.
Steve, can I ask you just one more question? Are you proposing that you might change the density of those?
Well, it sounds like we want to move forward and get reactions, but I do see that the potential of doing, change that whole western portion here
Yeah.
to be like this.
Yeah.
What's the difference really?
What's that?
There's not much difference.
There's a lot less density, there's a lot more of agrihood or low density and a lot sparser development on the far south side. But again, we're not there yet, we can get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
reactions, and
Okay.
my last comment again was that if we move forward with this and get reaction from the public, I wanna give everyone a voice, and there are some people that are stronger in their voices. I feel that there's some, as long as we disclaimer enough within the survey, I think it's beneficial to maybe get reactions to what we show here.
Okay.
But I'm leaving it to the committee to say otherwise as a whole committee.
Yeah, I have no problem putting this out for survey. I mean, let's see what people think.
How far will the survey go?
How far? Yeah. I mean, it's online, and so there'll be a shareable link through.
Well, the last one that was online, the rural area, you had put in your, I found out later, you had to put in your crossroads, because the rural area was not identified. Only subdivisions were identified.
He's talking about the strategic.
Okay, sorry.
Wasn't for the neighborhood.
Okay. All right, well, we're 15 minutes past. I was open for this kind of conversation. This is not the last. Don't feel like we just made a decision and we're here tonight, okay? All right? So I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that. Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here tonight and your contributions, and we hear you. Feel free to reach out to us with your comments and your questions. We'll work through it together.
So we'll finalize a plan of when that survey's out and the open house. It's our next step now that we finally set this up and wanted to see where this went.
Okay, when will the committee get to see more? Are we gonna get a heads up on the concept before it comes out? Are we is the committee gonna get a heads up on the concept that's gonna be presented to the open house before the open house? Or are we just gonna walk in there at the open house and then see everything put together? Cause I need more time than I need a week to absorb what's happening so that when I can put my thoughts together. And maybe the concept should also be posted on the project page instead of being unveiled at the public house, because what happens, and I talked with Deanna about this, is you look at something this complex and the limbic part of your brain just goes into overdrive, and the neofrontal cortex needs hours to catch up. Days, weeks to catch up.
Yeah, so that last meeting was intended to be like a neighborhood reaction, like getting neighborhood feedback. I mean, our and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but our intention was to have those concepts out in the survey before the open house. So they'd be out for probably, I don't know, 3 weeks or something, at least before the open house, and getting the survey before the open house.
Okay.
And it's these concepts, just to be clear, that are in the survey.
These two.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or should we clarify that?
Or not?
What's that?
Was some of the edits that we talked about or not?
I don't know if we landed on an edit. I was
Okay.
leading to hearing some.
Moving the Irish Lane Road in concept 2.
I think what we landed on
The
is,
committee like to,
is that not reactive to see what the response is, or are we removing that? So I guess that's clarity, I guess.
Removing what?
This.
not having Irish Lane shift in concept 2, and just leaving it run on the existing path.
I'm not sure people will understand that if it's not spelled out for them.
Having it in here?
The reason why it's there, that it even exists. I mean, if I'm not versed in
Looking
reading
at the
plans like
overhead
this,
map.
I mean, I think it would be in a question more of,
unless it's
should there be a
described.
a separate east-west route that removes traffic from Irish?
If you draw it on a map and put it out to the public, in their mind, a good share of them are gonna see it visually,
And it's there.
and it's there.
They'll bring it up in 10 years or 20 years.
They think it's gonna happen. They think it's gonna happen there, that's.
Oh, yeah.
They see it drawn on a map, something sent from the city, you bet.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Happens all the time.
And,
All the time happens.
and while I kind of look at it and I understand the logic of it, there's also, I mean, people's, feelings. I mean, I know Peter and his family, I mean, they built a new house. I mean, I just can't see, like a road going through there and several people's properties are impacted, or the road goes right through the house or whatever, and there not being a lot of trauma. And I think we need to take that into consideration, that to let people know that when you see a road or interchange or whatever, somebody's losing some land to that, because they don't always, that doesn't always relate, particularly if you're in the community to the north or south, trying to impact the community survey, you just see this and you don't see people's houses and you don't see people's lives. I'm not sure how you would do that in the survey, but I just wanna put that out there.
But does the plan work if it doesn't shift?
I think Public Works has thoughts on that. Definitely the north-south is important to having that connection if you're not gonna have the east-west. Or it's gonna use Irish, but there's gonna be some major
It's gonna be major impacts, if you're gonna go down Irish, there's gonna be major impacts to the existing houses.
There's impacts to the schools.
City went through the same discussions with Lacey Road 30 years ago, I think it was.
Well, even when we redid this part, I mean, that still made it a lot nicer road, but there's a lot of houses that live in this part that was developed.
And East Sherrill was supposed to be that northern bypass for Lacey. I don't know how that really worked.
The DOT said this is what we want.
I guess
Right,
I'm not
direction.
clear
You
on
want us-
what the committee as a whole wants to show.
Do you want us to vote on changing Irish Lane for clear directions?
Sure. Sure. So, keeping it as it is, if it's worded correctly, to be reviewed by the committee of how we describe it for reaction in the survey as it's shown. Yeah, I don't really do this.
Raise your hand.
Yes, or no, raise your hand. Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Raise your hand. I don't know. It's more clear.
If you wanna keep it like that?
Or to get reaction online if worded correctly. Let me know. All right. So the direction is to bring where Irish Lane is still the main connection to interchange or not. And a revision for the survey, raise your hand.
I'll put that for now.
Keep Irish Lane as it is.
Keep Irish Lane, remove that connection.
Shift it in concept to the existing Irish Lane. Yep, that's what I would say.
Right. So moved. Again, I'm just working on the plan, give you options and trying to get to a final result that works for everyone. So, I hope we're getting somewhere. All right, that's resolved. That's the only main change we're gonna make for now for the survey responses and potentially open house. When we talk about what framework we're going back to the committee or going to the open house. We're in flux. We're trying to make this work. All right. Appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, thank you.
We run an umbrella.
Okay, you did say public comment at the end of the meeting, so we need